Wars are created by the elite, not by the average person. And that's why they call it, there's a psychological ploy, and they call it, rally around the flag. So what I also warn them about is that in order to get people to sign up for the military, you have to pretend you're attacked. This is why FDR allowed Pearl Harbor. He tried getting us into World War II several times. Congress would not issue a declaration of war. Basically, they think that within this one world government that these cabals do want to create, they will be the Department of Defense and run the world. NATO is very dangerous. They create the wars. So I said it's not the average person.
Welcome to Discourse with Christian. I'm your host, Christian White, and today is, of course, a returning guest, Martin Armstrong, the founder of Armstrong Economics. Martin, how you been? Thanks so much for your time today.
Pretty good. Just, watching the world go left, right, going upside down,
Same here. I don't know what you've been up to outside of work and such. I've been reading a bit about the Eastern Front, which I felt, I think I shared with you offline, which I think is a period no one really talks about. But I think it's so interesting as it relates to today in a sense, the some of the characters behind the scenes and such. And of course, there's conflict again over there today. So that's something that I've been doing outside of the show and such. But anyhow, I figured we'd start off with your latest thoughts around the world.
Well, it's, I think most of it from a European perspective is really being driven by the economics. That's the real backdrop behind this, and why I think Europe keeps pushing for war. They're talking about, drafting and all kinds of stuff like that. I mean, I published a report on a peace plan for Russia. I was surprised. I was called in, and I was asked to write a peace plan. Apparently, I didn't have one. But I'm also on the opposite side of the table of the neocons. So I think that was part of the reason. Plus, they know I've got all the back channels on which, and both directions. So, and I was specifically asked to use my back channels. And I asked if this was sanctioned, or is this something on the side? What's going on here? And I was told that no, it was sanctioned. And I was approved to be called in. And so I was asked to write a plan, what I thought Putin would accept. So I went through the whole 9 yards. I said, your enemy is really Europe, not Russia. And another reason I think I get called in by different governments is I understand, I've worked with so many of them over the years, that I call it wordsmithing. And, back when Soros was attacking the pound, because I had advised Maggie Thatcher to keep the pound out of the euro, and then they staged a coup to get rid of her, and then they tried to take the pound into the euro, and it first went into this ERM. And politicians, John Major overvalued the pound to look strong, and so Soros was attacking it, and others were as well. And so I got called in. I think I didn't have a choice, because I'm the one that was telling Thatcher to stay out, and I said, look, you got to devalue the pound. It's way overvalued. And I was told that John Major ran for election and promised not to devalue the pound. So we can't do that. So solution was basically I wrote a paragraph. I said, here, have him basically just say that he's going to allow the pound to float to seek its own level. Oh, brilliant. It's the same thing. It's just that you're not saying I'm devaluing it. Oh, the market did, This is what I call wordsmithing. You're achieving the same goal, but you just have to switch the words around. Because a politician is never going to admit a mistake. All right. Like with all the stuff going on with COVID, they still won't come out and say, sorry, we were wrong. They won't do that. They're no longer required. They'll do that sort of thing. But they're not going to come out and say, gee, we were wrong. We were bamboozled by the vaccine companies and they weren't effective and they didn't really prevent you from getting COVID or spreading it. So, that's what all the analysis ended up showing. But you're not going to come out and admit that. So this is the same thing. When Trump was negotiating directly with Putin, you had Kalis, who's the number 2 there in the EU. And she came out and said, whatever they do, whatever Trump agrees with Putin, we're not going to honor it because we're not at the table. So basically what I laid out was that we say, okay, fine, look, you don't need to seat at the table. You already signed the Minsk agreement. Honor it. Allow the Donbass to vote. And, people just focus on the fake news. In reality, when Czechoslovakia broke up, it went Czech Republic, Slovakia. Yugoslavia broke up. How? According to ethnic lines. The Donbass are all Russians. Crimea are Russian. 15% of the population are Tatars from the old Mongol invasion of 1240. They're not Ukrainian people. They don't, and Ukraine is the motherland of ethnic cleansing. They killed more Polish, Hungarians, Jews, and Russians. And that's why the CIA protected them, because they were anti-Russian. And no Ukrainian Nazi was ever put on trial. Bandera, who started the whole ethnic cleansing stuff, USSR wanted to extradite him, and the CIA protected him. All the Germans were put up on trial. Fine. That was the show. But they didn't do anything with any of the Ukrainians. And so we had employees there in Kiev and in Donetsk. They wouldn't even talk to each other. And the propaganda, they're raised saying, oh, Russians, that caused the 7 million people to die from starvation, all this. And I said, that's not exactly true. First of all, Stalin was from Georgia, not a Russian. Lenin even wrote a letter saying, do not let Stalin succeed me. And in Russia, they believe that Stalin even poisoned Lenin to seize power. Then Kaganovich, who was his right-hand man, is the one that was in charge of stealing all the food from Ukraine. He was Ukrainian, born in Kiev. He was Jewish. Most serious scholars believe that he told Stalin to take the food from Ukraine as retribution for killing all the Jews. So, they run around hating Russians when there wasn't actually a Russian involved, but you got to pick up the rug and look at the dirt that's underneath it, and no matter what you look at, you always find that. Like they created Homeland Security and said, oh, some agencies had the information and didn't share it. It's the first Trade Center people. They were in prison and drew the two towers on the wall in their cell with planes going into it. They knew. So you always get this, no matter what you're talking about. You had, FDR and Senate investigations after World War II that he knew about Pearl Harbor and let it happen so he could get into war. U.S. had broken all the codes of the Japanese, and I put even on our site, there were leaks. And about 2 days before, the front page of the Honolulu Tribune said we're going to be attacked on the weekend. So I mean, and FDR pulled out all the carriers from there. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't matter what government you have. They will always allow people to die for a political reason. And so when I was called in to this meeting and I was shown, Russia turned over the KGB file, was about that thick. And it showed that the CIA basically, they had all the documents in there. The CIA really killed JFK. And everybody really knew that. I had heard about that a long time ago. And so I was told, do you realize what we're asking you to do is what they killed JFK for? I said, yes, I know. But I think what also they dragged me in for is that history to these people seemed to be just maybe the last 2 weeks. That's about it. And I scared them. I said, your policies are completely nuts. Putting sanctions on Russia, all right, the EU were into their 19th sanctions. That means the first 18 didn't work, right? We put sanctions on Cuba to get rid of Castro in 1960. They're still there. Didn't work. We put sanctions on Iran to get rid of the Ayatollah. 1979. He's still there. There isn't one instance of sanctions ever working. But the theory is, from these neocons, we'll punish the people, they'll rise up, overthrow their government. Then we'll get a ticker tape parade thanking us. It's just delusional. Please show me one time where your theory has ever worked. All it does is build an iron curtain. And then in 85, I had been called in by the Reagan administration when they were doing the G5 stuff, creating that. So I was down there and I knew what actually happened. When Gorbachev came to power, Reagan wanted to go meet him. And so what happened was the neocons were beside themselves. And they didn't want him to go. Oh, they couldn't call him a communist anymore. So they said, oh, you can never trust a Russian. And Reagan didn't listen to him. They went, I'm telling you, they practically pulled a coup against Reagan. Most people don't know this. They went to Congress to overrule him. They did everything in their power to prevent him from going to meet with Gorbachev. And so I explained to them that, look, when Khrushchev had to back down out of the Cuban Missile Crisis, that was also a loss of faith. What happened? There was a coup in Russia. Brezhnev comes into power. We get the hardline Cold War. Then when Gorbachev comes to power, I published in my book, The Plot to Seize Russia. I got a hold of declassified documents from the Clinton administration. Right in the beginning of the book, I put the Clinton document that shows Russia was invited to join NATO. And their neocons then staged a coup against Gorbachev. That's when Yeltsin had to stay on the tank and talk to people, not don't shoot your own fellow Russians, etc. So they're no different than what our CIA. They killed JFK to prevent peace. They took out Gorbachev to prevent peace. So you got neocons on both sides, and you got them in China too. These people just, I don't know, they grew up hating the other side, so I don't see them coming over and embracing them, oh, kumbaya or something, just not going to happen. Same thing in the Middle East. You got, these really zealot Hamas. They've been taught from a little kid, hate Jews. Same thing with, Iranians. The best you can get is a ceasefire. You really think you're going to convince Iran that Israel is going to be your friend and come, and we'll have dinner together. You can come to my synagogue. Not going to happen. It's their God against your God. There's certain things that are just ingrained. And we got to get this idea that we can get some sort of a lasting peace deal out of there. And even when Zelensky met with Trump the last time, he even came out and said Zelensky just absolutely hates Putin. He has no business even negotiating for the Ukrainian people. I speak to Korean military, other people, and they all basically say the same thing. His polls are down to 23%. And if he was on fire, they wouldn't urinate on him until he was dead. I don't see how he would ever be able to even retire in Ukraine. They'll kill him. He's kidnapped people, sent them to the front lines. I mean, there's videos out of he even sent people with Down syndrome without even a gun and said, get a gun from somebody that falls on the battlefield. Really? I mean, he doesn't care. The Washington Post found out that he knew when Russia was going to cross the border, and he didn't tell anybody. U.S. and satellites, everybody knew. And he did an interview with the Washington Press, and you can Google it up. They said, why didn't you tell your people when you knew? He responded, well, if I told them, it would have cost me $7 billion. They don't care about people. The more civilians that die, the better. Oh, we got to get them. They're evil. See how many people they killed. If you really cared, you'd seek peace. You got Boris Johnson from the UK is hopped on a plane to tell Zelensky he's not allowed to sign a peace deal. That first meeting when Zelensky was at the White House, it turned into like a food fight practically. I passed on information. I had sources in Ukraine that Boris Johnson showed up 3 days in advance. That was supposed to have been a meeting for just a signing in Kiev. And Boris Johnson told him, no, you insist that this has to be at the White House, and to go there and to embarrass Trump into keeping the money coming for the war. This is what he said. I passed that on. And that's why it turned into a food fight. I think it was Rubio who came out and said it was supposed to take place in Ukraine, and Zelensky changed it at the last minute. It was all just for a theater. They thought they could embarrass Trump into keeping the money going so the war would continue. That's what this is all about. They don't care if there's one Ukrainian left standing. And even if that last person that falls is Zelensky, great. Now we don't have to pay him. I mean, this is what you're looking at. So in this, that's, I think, part of also the reason that I was called in, because I know all the facts. John McCain was there in Maidan. Overthrow your government. We're behind you. Victoria Nuland handpicked the interim government. And then there was a leak. Her phone call got leaked, and that's where she said, F the EU, and instructed that interim unelected government, and they started to attack the Donbass. So they started the civil war intentionally. Then you have Merkel, who, I've dealt with politicians for close to 50 years. And she actually came out after, and then somebody, I think it was Der Spiegel, asked her why didn't they enforce the Minsk agreement. Maybe she had too much to drink that day. I don't know. But she actually told the truth. Well, we never intended to honor it. We were just buying time for Ukraine to build an army. So, and then Kalis has the guts to say we're not at the table. You were at the table and you lied to Russia. So why should you even be there? So that's why I said my solution in wordsmithing is to tell Europe, look, you already signed the Minsk agreement. You're going to honor it. Okay. If you do not, we withdraw from NATO. For Zelensky, who's running around telling everybody rebuilding Ukraine is going to be the biggest investment in European history, and he's counting his trillions of dollars, on every finger. And so I said an executive order should be issued, and barring any American from investing 10 cents directly or indirectly in Ukraine. You cut that little twerp off. You honor also Ukraine signed the Minsk agreement. Honor it, or you're not going to get anything. Then you would see the war stop. Putin's not interested in conquering all of Ukraine. Like I said, we had people there in Ukraine when his tanks went right up to it from the very beginning. I was concerned. I called the staff. I said, look, I will send a private jet to get you out of there. They said, not necessary. You're not doing anything. I said, what? It's just a show of force. He had a column of tanks all lined up outside of Kiev just to show he could if he wanted. But he didn't. Then he withdrew them. You can search this. This was all on TV even at the time. Even Sun Tzu said, if you do not understand your enemy, you will lose. And Putin, my concern about Putin is that he could be overthrown by not being strong enough. Kiev is where the Russians began. That was their first capital. It was destroyed by the Mongol invasion in 1240. Then they rose up again in Moscow. So Kiev to him is like London is to us. Kind of the motherland, per se. And so the thought of flattening Kiev or nuking it. It doesn't cross his mind, because that would be like us nuking London. He's more of a historian, and I know that from many sources, direct sources. So my concern is that they have neocons, like, and they don't have that view. They would flatten Ukraine in a second if they had the power. So this is what I explained in the meeting. I said, if you embarrass Putin, you think you can embarrass him into saying, oh, God, I have to leave. He will be overthrown, like they did to Gorbachev and like they did to Khrushchev. The third time will be the charm. They will grab power. All right, just as we're infected with neocons, they got a lot too. I mean, there's tapes of Lindsey Graham, in a meeting with Zelensky, saying this is the best money we ever spent to kill Russians. What the hell is that? You might as well say, well, gee, this is the best money we ever spent to kill Muslims or blacks. I mean, in London, they throw you in jail for 22 months, if not longer, for that. So what's the difference here? The Russian people, Ukrainian, American, and Chinese, we're all the same. The average person just wants to take care of their family, get along from one day to the next. Wars are created by the elite, not by the average person. And that's why they call it, there's a psychological ploy, and they call it, rally around the flag. So what I also warn them about is that in order to get people to sign up for the military, you have to pretend you're attacked. This is why FDR allowed Pearl Harbor. He tried getting us into World War II several times. Congress would not issue a declaration of war. I saw even a documentary. He went to Boston trying to convince them to send troops to, they're Irish. And they said, you really expect us to go over and defend the British after what they did to us in Ireland? Most of the people that did flee Europe and came, it was to get away from all that stuff. I mean, the ethnic differences are insurmountable. Just look at de Gaulle. All right, he withdrew from NATO, so French has its own nuclear weapons. He was told after World War II, when the CIA was trying to create the EU, and they said no money unless you agree to this. They saw it. They wanted Europe to be united as a buffer for communist Russia. You can go with what did de Gaulle say? He'll accept that partnership with the Germans, but not the British. All right. I've been to France many, many times. I was even a keynote speaker at the Bank of International Settlements conference in Paris. I've been to meetings for top banks, been told you got to bring a translator, but then you have to listen to the translator because a simple term like a bull market, if they don't understand the financial market, it comes out as a meat market. All right. So I had a corrector, and as soon as they realize I'm correcting the translator, then she's dismissed and the meeting takes place in English. when I was at the BIS, I sat at the table with all the heads of the central banks. And the table starts speaking English because the German doesn't know how to speak Italian. The one language everybody knew was English. The Frenchman sitting next to me, he was livid. This is Paris. We should be speaking French. I believe after dealing with them for so many decades, they just viewed that if Napoleon had won at Waterloo, the world would be speaking French. So to this day, they do not get along with the English. And I think that's the reason. In 1967, de Gaulle went and told, in Quebec, it was a big World's Fair, and was advocating Viva, to separate from Canada because the rest of them are English. You're French. I just think it's an inferior complex that dates back to Napoleon. And in Europe, these things live on for a long time. We handed half a dozen jets to Greece. And what did they say? Made the front pages. Oh, now we can do a sneak attack on Turkey, another NATO country. I mean, the hatred between the Turks and the Greeks go back to Alexander the Great. So at this meeting, I laid all this out. I said, look, what do we do? One, Putin proposed a tunnel from Russia to Alaska. You agree. He needs a win. Two, besides the threatening of the Minsk agreement, etc., you drop all sanctions. You then allow American companies to go into Russia and joint venture. For what? Russia is the richest country in the world from natural resources. On the rare earths, China does have a monopoly. This was part of the reason why Trump was talking about Canada, the 51st state, and Greenland for rare earths. All right. Why? It takes 920 pounds of rare earths to make just one F-35 jet. It's a national security. They are not per se rare. What is rare is that they're not like gold. So they don't get in one vein. It takes, more of strip mining to get this stuff. Now, Russia is also subservient to China on rare earths. Nixon and Kissinger, they separated the two. Our neocons have put the two together. So, my proposal of a joint venture and dropping the sanctions. One, it would help to divide China and Russia again. We provide the capital. Russia has the technology and the know-how to mine rare earths. We do not. So, we provide the capital. We start doing that. Number one, we can start getting rare earths from Russia instead of China. And it would help to split them. Secondly, by doing such a joint venture, that's telling Europe we're in partners with Russia, back off. So I think that has a double-edged sword to it. And it helps create peace. The problem with these people, and that I warned, I said, look, you put Russia and China together. There was a meeting with the Chinese foreign minister met with Kalis. I had sources there So I know what was really said, and I let them know. Kalis was trying to convince China to back out and not let and let Russia surrender or fold or whatever. The response was, we are not prepared to allow Russia to lose. And he said, because we know we would be next. So I explained to him, I said, look, these neocons have completely put the world at risk. They've not only put China and Russia together. I said, if I'm going to put on their hat and look at it from their perspective, I'm going to attack Taiwan. North Korea attacks the South and Japan. Iran attacks in the Middle East. And Russia takes on NATO. How are we going to deal with 4 fronts simultaneously? All right, NATO is out there saying we can defeat Russia. Honestly, the BS they're telling, Russia will never push the button because they know the nuke would fall back on them. It's really. They are telling these European leaders they have 3.4 million soldiers against Russia's 1.5. So we can just walk in, Putin will fall to his knees and beg for his life before we chop off his head. The problem with that 3.4 includes all Americans and Canada. So, but this is why you see these European leaders pounding their chest. They really think that they can walk in, conquer Russia, get the 75 trillion in assets, and then the Holy Roman Empire will rise again from the ashes, and they will rule the world. They're delusional. All right, you have Erdogan in Turkey with the same kind of idea, resurrecting the old Ottoman Empire. When Hamas attacked Israel, he was out there cheering on all the Arabs, trying to show, I'm the leader. Come, let the Ottoman Empire rise again. I don't know what it is about these people. Look, I've been to dinners in London and they go, well, the sun still doesn't set on the British Empire. And yeah, okay. It's old glories or something. And that's why I think the French are just so upset about Napoleon losing. These things last for a long time. And I'm sure if a French girl brought home a German, or maybe even worse yet, a British boyfriend to marry, the father's going to go, you do know what they did to us, Look, you have even Bismarck in 1888, one of his famous forecasts. He said, Europe's going to be engulfed in a major war and it's going to come from the Balkans. Anyway, that hasn't been there. You have to understand that the Balkans and the Ukraine region, it was part of the Ottoman Empire. So many empires have occupied it. So you have basically Islam, you have Eastern Orthodox Christianity, you have Western Orthodox, and then you have Jewish. So you have 4 religions, ethnic groups all divided because they were here sometime, whatever. You talk to Serbians and they go, there's Armenians. It's just the way it is. It's not like the United States. And I explained this to EU when they had called me into forming the EU. I said, you don't understand what made America great. It wasn't a single currency. I said, it was discrimination. Oh, how can you say that? I said, because it was fair. Whoever was last off the boat was discriminated against. He got a job when he could speak English. So the second generation, everybody's intermarried. You ask an American, what are you? Oh, I'm half Irish, half German, whatever. I said, you don't see that over here. The language keeps everybody apart. And the cultures and stuff like that. I mean, from an American perspective, I love Europe. You can go to Italy and you get great pasta. But even in Italy, you go to the south and you get what we think is Italian. Because it was the Sicilians that came over to Philadelphia. Pizza was really invented in America. I went to Europe with my family when I was like 13. I finally saw a sign for pizza down in Naples. Oh, wow. I went over, it was a cracker with some tomato sauce on it. That was it. I said, there's no pizza. And, you go to, you get Neapolitan type sauce. Then you get different in Rome. Then you go up north, you get, a little bit, you get bolognese. And then you go all the way up north, you get Alfredo. All right. So you have 4 different cultures even within Italy. I went into a bakery in Rome when I was 13. I asked, you got a cannoli? The guy practically pulled a knife on me. That's not Italian, that's Sigi. Excuse me, I thought it's Italian, I mean, it's, they're very, this is the way Europe is. It's, did you ever hear of a Welsh rabbit? It's a sandwich in
No.
England. It's a grilled cheese sandwich. It's basically derogatory, saying the Welsh are too poor to even have a rabbit. So we go, you want a Welsh rabbit? What's a Welsh rabbit? It's just this grilled cheese sandwich. That's it. So, I mean, this is Europe. It's delightful from a tourist perspective. You go to each place, you see, oh, this is different, whatever, but they also are very deep in their culture. That's why you see Hungary fighting tooth and nail with the EU. No, we don't want these migrants. They're destroying our culture. You can't do this by force. And I've explained to them, I said, until everybody speaks the same language, they're not going to intermarry. I mean, there'll always be an exception, but in general, no. The United States is called a melting pot because that's what happened. Once everybody spoke the same language, everybody intermarried. German married an Italian or whatever. It's common here. It's rare to find somebody that just won. But in Europe, it's the other way around.
Yeah, you're reminding me of some of the history I've been reading about how, or I should say, just in general, how I feel like the humanities, history in particular, maybe Europeans are different because I feel like you're around it more, at least over in other parts of the West, where it's not, we don't have the Colosseum in our backyard or something. That there's and I'm borrowing a term from J. Paul Getty. I remember reading his autobiography. He called some of these Americans, especially the ones, well off, where they're kind of like barbarians. There's actually a chapter I think he has dedicated to that, where they don't really have an understanding, the culture, kind of the history and kind of the roots and such. And I'm kind of tying that in with how I feel like people don't fully grasp and appreciate it. And I think you're elucidating it. You're bringing it to light as it relates to Europeans and the cultural and ethnic idiosyncrasies that make up each part of it. Yeah, I think it's very underrated, at least over here in America. I don't know. I can't speak for Europe, but yeah, it is fascinating. And what was I going to comment on? How about other things going on that are grabbing your attention, whether that's over in over in Asia a bit. I know you covered that a little bit, or Latin America, or even over here in the States. Any comments?
Well, I think that I mean, Trump is trying to like tell people to different countries to adopt the dollar. Um, he's kind of on this thing with trying to defeat China and BRICS, etc. But it's all about currency again, and they don't quite understand, I think, the full dynamics behind some of this. If a country um, adopts the dollar, pegs the dollar to their currency, whatever, then they import our economic conditions. The Fed raises rates, rates go up there too. Fed lowers rates, and so you end up importing and exporting inflation or deflation, which has nothing to do with your domestic economy. Um, so, this is what's kind of going on to some degree. Um, look, from the proposal I did, I believe it did also end up on Putin's desk. And a few days later, you had Lavrov come out and said Europe is willing to guarantee, Russia is willing to guarantee that they have no interest in invading NATO. This was the crux of the report, saying Europe wants this. They need the war because economically they're declining. You had the two finance ministers of UK and France hint that they may need an IMF bailout. And so this is really, I think, the watershed event that's on the horizon. Our banking system uses U.S. Treasuries as its reserve. They don't use, California bonds or something like that. If California went bust, the traders are going to say, okay, who's next? Oh, maybe Illinois or something. They're not going to attack the Treasury. In Europe, because they never consolidated the debt, they are extremely vulnerable. So if France ends up being pushed over the edge, what are the traders going to do? They're immediately going to look at all the banks and who has the most French debt. They did that after Greece in 2010, all right? And so then you start shorting those banks. So you're looking at the banking system of Europe collapsing. Also the pension funds. Now they understand this, all right, which is partly why I think they're pushing for war sooner than later. You just had also Russia come out and suggest that they put nukes in Cuba and Venezuela. Again, put on their hat. We're talking about giving tomahawks to Ukraine. I'm concerned that would start World War III. Why? A tomahawk is not just a conventional missile. It can also carry a nuke. Now, you're sitting in Moscow. Zelensky just fires one at Moscow. Do you assume it's conventional? or do you assume it's nuclear? You can't tell. So what do you do? Self-defense, you're going to have to assume the worst because there's no option B if you're wrong. So I cautioned them. I said, if I'm him, we just tomahawks. I'm concerned that he gets overthrown. And if that happens, one of these neocons over there are going to say, we have to protect Russia, take out Kiev. Then what? If Europe says, okay, that's it, that's nuclear war, every capital is targeted. Is this what you want? I mean, it's gotten to the point of just complete insanity. Russia just, announced that, they have a submarine with a nuclear torpedo, which one can take out all of Britain. I mean, what are these people playing with here? And so the threat of putting nukes in Cuba and Venezuela, these neocons, it's like they hire somebody to kill their wife. Well, I didn't do it, he did. And this is Zelensky to us. Well, we didn't nuke you, he did. But you gave it to him. Or a guy that's a murderer. Well, I didn't kill her, the gun did, not me. I just pulled the trigger. I don't know. I just feel as though we got to get rid of these people, honestly. So I was told that I did get an email back or a text message back about a week later saying, thank you. Negotiations are going well. I don't want to give anybody false hope, but at least what I was called into appears to be a sanction but parallel course. So let's keep our fingers crossed that we can. I don't think we can change the cycles, but I think we can change the amplitude. That's basically what I'm hoping for. But, Asia, I disagree with Trump's tariff wars per se, thinking that, we can increase the revenue this way. No, and we'll see if the Supreme Court overrules it or what. But the theory comes from basically the 19th century, before income tax. The country did fund itself with tariffs. But we also didn't have a social agenda. Minimal government. Once you created the income tax and the progressive got in there, government's going nowhere but up. It used to be 3% of the workforce, no more. I mean, it's human nature. A guy that starts a small business always wants to make it better and expand. That's a human trait, maybe. Problem is, you elect somebody as a congressman or politician for whatever, they have that same trait. Oh, I could do this if I just had a little bit more power. So every crisis, You see, uh, SEC said, well, if we had this, we could have prevented it. Of course, they get that. Next one, well, we need this too. It just goes on and on and on and on. And look, our interest expenditures are exceeding military. A 3-year-old with a pocket calculator can figure out we're doomed. Eventually, interest expenditures are going to continue to rise and consume everything else. That's when, it all comes crashing down when you can't sell the new debt. You can keep the Ponzi scheme going as long as there's somebody at the door to buy the next tranche of debt that comes out. When that stops, it's Katie barred the door, So that's what we're facing, but I don't think the EU is going to survive after 2030. In Asia, China understands the game. Cycles are part of their religion. So they're not like us in the West. When I wouldn't have to do conferences, I'd have to explain there's a business cycle. We were always taught in school that it's linear, every year is progressive, whatever. It doesn't work that way. There are booms and busts. Sorry. So China understands that there's a cycle. And what they're doing is they're copying the United States. So rebuilding the Silk Road, etc. They're trying to build a consumer-based economy. That's better than a mercantile economy that Europe does. Google it. You'll see that the average net worth of a German is less than that of an Italian. Why? Because they keep their taxes so high, regulations so high, they're afraid of inflation, so they oppress their own people. And you can go on St. Louis Fed, just call up a chart of GDP of the US, and then call one up from Europe. It's like a tiny fraction of the United States. So China is not stupid. They understand and are copying the US model. I don't think Trump quite understands that, but they know their time is coming. They will surpass the United States. They will become the financial capital of the world for probably a couple 100 years, and then they'll decline. Then they'll move back off to, to Europe. Everybody gets their 15 minutes, in the sun, I guess. It was Lydia. Persia takes them out. They get the capital. Then Athens becomes the financial capital. Then Rome becomes the financial capital. After the fall, and Spain becomes the richest country, found America. They lose it to the Dutch, or actually to the Germans. The Germans don't hold it for very long. They lose it to the Dutch. The Dutch lose it to the British. Then the British, after World War I and II, comes to America. All right? So nobody's ever had this cycle forever. That doesn't exist. All right? We all get our 15 minutes in the sun. And so you see domestically what you asked about. Mandami in New York is, look, at the last WEC conference, I stood up and I said, look, the computer says the Democratic Party is collapsing and it's going to go extinct and it's going to split. Everyone said, really? Now I get emails, oh my God, You're right. We can see this. Um, Schumer's walking a tightrope, trying to pretend between the progressives and the conservatives that we can fight, keep the government shut down, and keeps telling it, oh, see, it's Trump's fault. It's Trump's fault. Takes two to tango. And you only need 6 Democrats to finally cave in. But he is, after Mandami, I think, victory, I think you're going to see a lot more Democrats shaken up. The conservative ones are just going to leave. They're not into this, Mandami grocery stores, but this is the problem with these people. They get in there. They don't understand anything. Even Trump with the tariffs. Oh, we lost all these jobs. It's not, look, I've advised companies, I've restructured them internationally. The issue is not, oh, gee, if we move over here, we'll pay this guy $2 less an hour than this one. That's not the issue. It's taxation. All right. I became friends with Margaret Thatcher because I was moving. She had heard there was this guy sending companies into Britain. I happen to have known her personal economic advisor, Sir Alan Walters. He says, yeah, that's Marty. Oh, there is a guy? I want to meet him. Maggie was very intelligent. She asked me why I was doing this. I said, look, if I needed skilled labor, auto manufacturers, etc., I was putting in Britain. Why? Because in Germany, the social costs that the company must pay over and above the employee, that the employee will never see, is 40% more. All right. I was advising one German company. I got called in for a crisis there. They wanted to lay off 20% of their workforce. Initially told they could. Then, at the last minute, the government said, no, it's not fair that you pick and choose. You have to make the offer to everybody. What happened? If you knew you could get a job across the street, you took the 150,000 euros and you left. They got stuck with the very people they were trying to get rid of. I told this story to a board member of the IMF. They said, we found the same thing in Greece. I said, it's human nature. All right. The social regulations in Europe are abominable. All right. So I was putting all the auto manufacturers, things of this nature. Anybody needed skilled labor, I sent them to Britain. All right. So it's taxation. So what Trump does not understand, look at the city of Detroit. All the auto industry moved there. That's where they began, right? None of them are there now. Why? Because Detroit thought, wow, we're going to make so much money, kept raising taxes and taxes and taxes. They left. Detroit ended up going into default in 1937. They finally came out of it when? 1963. All right, you see the same story. The city of Mainz in Germany. All right, 15th century. Same thing, Gutenberg press. Oh, we're going to make so much money. The politicians keep raising taxes. And so even Gutenberg left. They end up defaulting. What happens? The creditors come in and they sack the city. The Pope even excommunicated the politicians. It's always the same story. So Trump with his tariffs, oh, they left because you're getting $2 cheap. No, we chased them out ourselves with taxation. I testified before the House Ways and Means Committee. They asked me, they called me in, and they wanted to know why no American company got any of the contracts in China, like to build like the Yellow River Dam. It's very simple. We tax worldwide income. Germany does not. So a German company bidding on the very same contract in China is already nearly 40% cheaper. He can then send German citizens, and you go over there, and whatever you earn outside of Germany, it's all tax-free. Compete with that. United States, oh, you found 100 euros on the ground while you were in Germany. Where's our 50%? Our politicians are so damn greedy. Look, Wall Street, Goldman Sachs moves its most profitable division to Florida. Boca Raton is basically going to become the new Wall Street. With Mandami really thinks that he can. They don't see this. They don't understand it. I mean, just look at California. Companies leaving, Tesla, etc. So what's the solution? Newsom says, oh, we'll put an exit tax and punish them for leaving. Why don't you look at why they're leaving to begin with? So you're going to raise even more taxes and we'll punish them for leaving. Are you solving the problem? You're not. It's just how much money once you give anything to the government, they put in income tax in 1913, okay, to pay for World War I. Look at the ads, look at the newspapers back then. Oh, only the rich is going to pay. It's not going to be you. World War II comes, we're on payroll taxes. All right? We just went through an audit. Do you have contract employees so you're not having to charge their Social Security? So, no, we don't have contract employees. Sorry. Cost me $50,000 to do an audit to prove that what I said was true. Oh, okay, fine. You don't know anything. Thank you. I mean, this is America. I got to spend an audit, go through an audit, cost me a shitload of money to go through this stuff to prove what I just said is true. Income tax, it always sounds nice. We're going to tax the rich. I got to know what you're doing, because how do I know you're not rich? So I got to know everything you're doing. This is why in the Constitution, it outlawed direct taxation, because it makes us subservient economic slaves to the government. They got to know everything we do. And now, all I've ever heard for years, we wouldn't have budget deficits if everybody paid what they were supposed to. They assume. Honestly, we're all crooks. We all lie. Nobody pays what they're supposed to. And they create this vision in their mind. We wouldn't have a deficit. I said, I don't care. And I've said this to their face. I don't care if you double what you get. You'll still have a deficit, because you always spend more than whatever you have. And that's why people, I tell people, look, say, oh, you're anti, gold standard. I said, gold standard's not going to work. None of this stuff's going to work. You got to change the political system first. Gold standard will collapse, just same as Bretton Woods. You fixed gold at $35. Sounds nice, but you didn't stop creating money. Come on. Like I said, a 3-year-old with a pocket calculator could figure this is going to go bust. I mean, it's not, Nobel Prize winning science here. Um, and this is the problem. We don't Politicians have lost the way to run. And I want to run for Congress, vote for me. I'll give you a free car and a lollipop. How do I pay for that? Can't be a fixed rate, can't be a gold standard, anything like that. All right. I got to create more money to make that promise come to, I got to bribe you. It's not like vote for me because I'll run it better than that guy. Not going to happen. It's vote for me and I'll give you this. So until we basically change the political system, not going to happen.
Now, I hear a lot of people talk about it being a controlled demolition. And I also hear I had a guest on just recently mention about how you have, some might say, the cabal or these factions that kind of run the show. That they're into the occult, they're into gematria and numerology and things of that nature. Do you have any comments on that?
I don't really see that. And I think a lot of that is giving them more credit than they deserve. They're not that smart. There are nefarious groups like Soros, but they're trying definitely to undermine the system. But I wouldn't say that that's part of the government. It's more from the outside trying to get in. Like, Mandami, giving him up to what, $37 million to run. It's not grassroots money. He won basically because of Soros. That's it. All these, not grassroots out there knocking on every. They're paid. $37 million buys a lot. But this is what they do. Soros has got this bug up his ass of this open society. Shouldn't be any borders and all this, one world government nonsense. This is why you get the WHO. They want to dictate everything to the world on any disease or whatever. You're going to do what we said. This is not democracy. NATO, why are they so dangerous? Because basically they think that within this one world government that these cabals do want to create, they will be the Department of Defense and run the world. NATO is very dangerous. It was created as a pawn against the Warsaw Pact. When communism fell, we didn't need NATO anymore. I saw the internal memos. How do we remain relevant? They only remain relevant by saying Putin wants to invade Europe. Okay? If Putin said, I'm not interested in invading, let's have peace, then why do we need NATO? Oh, everybody's got to give us 5% of your GDP. They create the wars. So I said, it's not the average person. Dick Cheney and his Halliburton, they made a shitload of money off Iraq war. And as soon as they were going to get investigated, what happened? Oh, they resigned their American charter and moved to Dubai so they couldn't be subpoenaed. I mean, personally, I'm just sickened by all this nonsense. But as far as saying that the people actually in government um, are part of this grand, they're not that smart. If they were really in, that wouldn't get called in. Um, and I even took uh, I took one person with me to Capitol Hill. Said they really wanted to see what's going. I said, "You sure you want to see what I see?" I said, "You're never going to look at government the same." Spent the whole day there, all kinds of meetings back and forth. When we walked out, he said, "Holy shit, they don't know anything." I said, "I told you." um, don't credit them too much. I know they can turn into conspiracy theories or whatever. The evil people are on the outside, like Soros, in my opinion. Um, and they don't believe in democracy. The EU was set up. Um, you talk about lies. I mean, Ursula calls Putin a dictator. Excuse me. He's at least stood for election. The head of the EU never stands for election. All right. You're appointed. The people in the back room who make the laws in the EU, unelected. The only people they're allowed to vote for are the parliament. And look it up. The parliament has no power to make a law. It's just a dog and pony show. That's it. They deliberately wanted to prevent any democratic process. So I know we've been talking for a long time.
Yeah, yeah, I'm just kinda taking it all in, and I know, you have other things that you need to go to and such, but I'll just comment and say that as I've continued to go on this journey of trying to, better understand the world and the power players and such, it is it's amazing how nuanced and complex it is, and I feel like when people look at politics from a very binary perspective, at least over here in the states. Republicans, Democrats. I think it's much more than that. I think there's an element of course deep politics and such. And it is interesting elements within the government, intelligence agencies that are more or less involved in criminal activities, trafficking, drugs, people, of course, et cetera, et cetera. And that is very alarming to me. And I know it's obviously been going on for a long time. And it is interesting to hear people's take on it. But I always appreciate your time, of course, Martin, having you on, and especially our love for our mutual love for history. So, uh, um, with that being said, I don't. There's anything else you'd like to impart to the audience, as well as how they can learn more about you.
Well, you can go to armstrongeconomics.com. We keep it open. You don't even have to put in an email or anything. We don't even sell advertising. It's an open source. Um, but all I can say is just look at the leaders of Europe. The worst crop I've ever seen in my life. They're not intelligent, and they are just being manipulated by people behind the scenes, particularly NATO. So it's you know be careful about the conspiracy theories. They're not that smart. They really aren't. It's deeper than that.
Roger that. Roger that. Well, I appreciate it. Of course, your time, and Martin, I'll let you go. Have a great weekend.
Well, thank you, and catch up later. I'm actually invited for a follow up to a cocktail party on the 14th. So see where we're at next.
Quick ask: over half of you who watch the show regularly haven't yet subscribed. If you've enjoyed the show, you're finding value in it, subscribing is really the best way to support the channel. It's, of course, free. It literally takes 2 seconds, and it lets the algorithm know that this content matters. And of course, my commitment to you is going to be that I'm going to continue to bring on great guests, refine those questions. And of course, I'm always receptive to your feedback. If there's certain people that you'd like to have on, or certain questions, or this, that, and the other that you'd like to have as part of the show going forward, things of that nature, please let me know. I'm pretty easy to access. Anyhow, that's my commitment to you. If you can subscribe, that would mean a lot. Thanks.